Moving to this now, the rate of murder in the country has shown a slight decrease overall, but the rate of murder in coastal provinces remains high. The Police Minister, Senzo Mchunu, released the latest crime statistics on Friday. To discuss this, I'm now joined by Chad Thomas of IRS Forensic Investigators. Chad, good to have you on the program this evening. Can you firstly provide an overview of the recent crime statistics released by the Police Minister, particularly focusing on the general decrease in crime, but also the persistent issues in coastal provinces?
Good evening. Yes, we are seeing overall a decrease, but in certain provinces we are seeing an increase. In fact, in 4 provinces we saw an increase in murder statistics, but overall, at the height of 2023, we saw murders sitting at about 80 a day. We're now down to about 70, 71 a day. That's still an atrocious statistic. It means that we're looking at, on average, 3 murders every single hour in South Africa. These are statistics that just don't make any sense to us. However, coming out of the releasing of the stats yesterday and the tone of the minister's speech, we can see that there's a change within our criminal justice system in the manner in which they want to address crime and the manner in which they've accepted that it is at far too high levels and that something needs to be done drastically to be able to neutralize the situation and try to bring about some sense of security for the citizens of our land.
Going back to this point, the stats highlight ongoing concerns with murder rates in coastal areas like the Eastern Cape, the Western Cape, as well as KwaZulu-Natal. What would you say are some of the unique challenges these provinces face that actually contribute to the higher murder rates?
Well, we're seeing in KwaZulu-Natal that there is a fight-fire approach when it comes to the way General Kanazi is treating the situation in respect of serious and violent crimes. And we've read and seen over the last couple of months how the police are tackling that particular problem. But as much as they're trying, they are still, in many instances, outgunned and outmaneuvered by gangs. When one moves down to the Eastern Cape, which is mostly a rural province, we're seeing a massive increase in crimes relating to extortion, murder, rape, etc. And that, of course, is of exceptional concern. We look at the Western Cape, we've always had a problem with gangs, we've always had a problem with drugs. There's been a problem that has intensified the last few years in respect of extortion. So it's not necessarily where these provinces lie, it's the fact that there may be an issue with resources. But again, yesterday we saw the coming together of national, provincial and local governments in Cape Town signing bilateral agreements that will be able to ensure effective cooperation between local policing, provincial policing, and of course the national policing, which is our most important policing because that's where our detectives lie.
Let's zoom into the Western Cape. You mentioned gang-related violence. This is a significant concern, if you will. How does this issue then impact overall crime rates and community safety within this area? And what strategies, Chad, are being employed to address it?
It's heartbreaking when one looks at the situation in the Western Cape, especially with the gang-related violence, because there's absolutely zero respect for life. When one gang is moving in on another gang's turf, they don't care who gets caught up in the crossfire. And of late, we've heard of a lot of children that have been shot, some wounded, some sadly killed as a result of this particular violence. It comes down to the control of protection rackets. It comes down to the control of illicit trade, whether it's in drugs, whether it's in tobacco. And as a result of that, we need to see more effective policing deployed in the Western Cape. Now, as it currently stands, our policing is very reactive. It's not proactive. And the only way it's going to become proactive is to capacitate units like crime intelligence fully so that they can get to the bottom of who runs the syndicates, chase up the monies, chase up the schemes that are being operated, share actionable intelligence with the reactive units, and ensure that from a prosecutorial guided perspective, they have winning cases. Because as it stands right now, we're seeing a lot of foot soldiers being prosecuted. We're not seeing a lot of gang leaders prosecuted, albeit we do see a couple of cases currently before the High Court in the Western Cape in respect of some violence that occurred impacting on police officers, rival gang members, etc. But it's not enough. We need to ensure that crime intelligence is fully capacitated and that the police take a proactive stance rather than reacting to all these different crimes that are being perpetrated.
Chad, given the reported decrease in serious crime overall, what strategies do you believe or interventions have proven effective in actually reducing crime in certain provinces or cities? And how can these strategies be adapted to areas that are still struggling with high crime rates?
Partnerships is the most important. The police need to take partnerships very, very seriously, especially when it comes to communities. We have community policing forums for a reason. It's a constitutional requirement. We see that these community policing forums who are capacitated by members of the community and have resources provided to them by the provincial safety and security departments play such a pivotal role. They don't just bring intelligence to the table, they also bring the concerns of residents to the table. They also know the crime hotspots. And working together with these type of partnerships has gone a long way in reducing crime. We're also seeing partnerships that are broadening within the policing sector. So we've seen a reduction in cash in transit heists. There's an organization known as CITASA, the Cash in Transit Association of South Africa, which is made up of the major role players, and they are feeding actionable intelligence to SAPS, which SAPS is reacting to. So you can see these partnerships are bearing fruits. Within the insurance industry, where we saw an increase in murder for hire, an organization known as the South African Insurance Crime Bureau, which represents the short-term insurers and long-term insurers, has been actively involved in assisting SAPS in investigations. We've got Business Against Crime South Africa that's been in place for a long time that is helping to manage these relationships and to turn these relationships into formalized public-private partnerships. So the way we're going to be able to combat crime is to acknowledge that the capacity that the police currently has isn't sufficient and they need the assistance from the private sector.
Also interesting are the minister's comments. He's emphasized a whole of government approach to tackling crime. Chad, how important is this interagency collaboration that you speak of in addressing crime, and what roles do different sectors play in this approach?
It's the most important aspect, and I'm so glad you touched on it, because what we see are different role players operating in silos and not generally cooperating with one another. We've got incredible agencies in South Africa that can work together with others, and we've also got established legislation that enables these law enforcement agencies to fight crime. When one looks at the Financial Intelligence Center, they help follow the money. When one looks at the relationships established through non-governmental organizations, civic society like SABRIC, they are assisting the police in expediting the subpoena process and to analyze the resulting information from the banks. All of this is absolutely critical. You've then, of course, now got IDAC as a fully functional department within the NPA, which is going to be able to investigate by employing their own members so that the members that are currently seconded and deployed to them can go back to their positions within the NPA and within the Hawks to help capacitate those units. But we have to also be mindful of the fact that we've lost 8,000 skilled detectives within SAPS over the last 5 to 6 years that haven't been replaced by skilled detectives. We also have to look at the fact that the Hawks are only capacitated to 60% of their required manpower. They just recently received 254 new members to bolster their ranks, but those members don't have the necessary experience. They came straight from police college. So where we're seeing the problem is that we have repeat offenders simply because we see arrests, but we don't see successful prosecutions. Operation Chanela last year arrested over 600,000 people. We know what our prison capacities are. There's no way that those 600,000 people were convicted on whatever crimes they were arrested for. And that's simply because there's not sufficient detectives to be able to investigate the sheer volume of crimes. And that then becomes a problem within the NPA as well, because there's not enough prosecutors. You then look at the courts, there's not enough courts, and the presiding officers, there's not enough presiding officers. So we need to start with the basics and ensure that the detectives are skilled and that there are sufficient detectives to be able to investigate, because the crime doesn't stop when you arrest somebody on the street corner for being in possession of a stolen firearm. you have to find out where that firearm was used in crimes, and you have to keep that person so that you can find out what crimes that person was linked to. And this is where we're falling short. We don't have enough detectives.
But how accurate and reliable are the current crime statistics? And also, what are the main challenges associated with collecting and even reporting such crime data?
I would say that the statistics are fairly accurate. And the reason I say that is, and I don't want to be part of the rumor mill, but when we look at the fact that the statistics weren't released before the elections in May, one must ask the question, why? Was it deliberately withheld because crime is on everybody's mind and it may have affected the outcome of the election? Nevertheless, we had a successful election and it proved the fierce independence of the IEC. However, those stats not being released makes one wonder why. So I believe the stats are very accurate to a large extent. You can't hide the fact that people are being murdered. You can't hide the fact that kidnap for ransom is on the increase and extortion is on the increase. Where we do have underreporting, sadly, is sexual offences, specifically rape. A Cal study at WITS a few years ago found that only 1 in 9 rape victims actually report the rape. So it's a very underreported crime. We also find that other types of crime that go underreported are where people aren't insured and they suffer a loss through a theft or a burglary. They don't have confidence that the police may recover those goods. They don't need that reference number for their insurance because they don't have insurance, so they don't report it. So from a statistical perspective, we have crimes that are underreported, but from a statistical perspective, you can't hide the amount of CRTs that are taking place because there's an industry behind that reports on those figures. You can't hide the ATM bombing statistics, again, because there's an industry behind that will report those figures. However, when it comes to cases like kidnap for ransom, we know this is on the increase, but it's also underreported because people get told, don't report it to the police, rather pay the people that have taken your loved ones captive. So therein lies another underreported crime, which is a problem. So we do believe that kidnap for ransom, the figures are higher. We also believe that the extortion cases, the figures are higher. And that, of course, is also an underreported crime for obvious reasons. People are being extorted, they're being threatened, and they're being threatened with not just assault, but perhaps even with murder. And there's a lot of murder for hire that is happening in our country. But largely speaking, from a reported crime perspective, the statistics come across as being accurate.
So I want to add a bit more to this theme that you're following on. What trends are you observing in the types of crimes committed and their locations? Are there any emerging patterns that are quite concerning for you?
Yeah, the biggest concern for me are two types of crimes that are massively on the increase. The one is extortion. We've seen these so-called mafias mushrooming everywhere, whether it's construction mafia, whether it's mafia that's operating in the taxi industry, whether it's restaurants, whether it's nightclubs. It seems to be an ever-growing problem. And one must remember that protection rackets are the way that the mafia made their bones in America during the Prohibition period. So extortion is always of grave concern because it gives rise to gangs growing in terms of their numbers and in terms of their notoriety. One could look at the gang that's operating in Mamelodi that calls themselves Boko Haram. They are terrorizing communities, and it's across industry that they are busy extorting people. The other crime that, of course, that is very, very concerning and on the increase is kidnap for ransom. And that's simply because people are hearing about the massive numbers involved in terms of ransoms that are being paid. And again, it's across society. You've seen children kidnapped in low-income areas being ransomed off for a couple of hundred or a few thousand rand. You have people, middle-class suburbia, being kidnapped and held for hundreds of thousands of rands. And then, of course, there's businessmen and their families who are being targeted because they come from cash-rich type businesses, and they've been targeted specifically for high amounts of money. One looks to the Portuguese community, they're getting targeted. They own butcher shops, they own greengrocers, they own bottle stores, very cash-rich environments. One looks at the Muslim community, they own distribution companies, wholesale companies, also cash-rich environment, they've been targeted. But because of the copycats, anybody is potentially now a victim when it comes to kidnapping, especially in respect of what we now term express kidnappings, where people aren't being held very long. They're just being held to empty out their bank accounts using the device that they have with them.
Going back to an issue that you touched on, the stats show a rise in crimes against women, including an increase in rapes and assaults. What would you say are some of the underlying factors contributing to this rise that we are seeing? And also, to extend it, what measures are needed to better protect women and children in this country?
Well, a frightening statistic is that 5% of reported rape cases actually result in some or other sanction, in other words, a conviction. And that doesn't take into consideration what I mentioned earlier about the Cull study at Wits that showed that only 1 in 9 rapes were actually reported. So it's far less than the 5% conviction rate. When one sees a heinous crime like rape with such low conviction rates, it makes the opportunistic criminal feel that there's little to no accountability or consequence. And this is the problem that we have currently in South Africa. We've got such low rates of conviction. So few cases are actually getting enrolled. The previous minister told us that over a 5-year period, 5 million criminal dockets had been closed and marked as undetected. That this makes any opportunistic criminal into a career criminal because they see they're not going to be held to account. They see there's little to no consequence, and they start climbing the rungs of the ladder and getting worse in terms of the crimes that they're executing.
Chad Thomas, thank you so much for your time, looking at the crime stats showing a general decrease, but still concerns being raised, especially regarding murder rates in coastal areas. This does remain a concern.